Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for this video as we kind of preface the 2023 NBA Draft Combine in Chicago, Illinois, that is coming up this week. And I'm very excited for this because this is the time of the year when, first of all, the draft process really starts to cement itself as the thing that we've been talking about all year long, and we start to really get down to the nitty-gritty on where these players start to separate themselves, some opportunities to get in front of the eyes of all 30 executives and scouts from all 30 teams all in one place. I think it's a really great event, and an event that has changed the NBA draft history over the last few years or so. You think about some players who made big names for themselves and have made impacts in the league. A guy I think about is Jericho Sims. Of course, played his college ball at Texas. I actually faced him in high school in what was my final high school game. We went to overtime with him and lost, and now he's playing for the New York Knicks, which is pretty crazy to think that with how that all played out and everything. It's just pretty nuts. So this time of the year is really a lot of fun for me. I hope you guys do enjoy this video too, because we're going to look at some prospects to watch for during the 2023 NBA Draft Combine. This is not a complete or total list. This is not just every single entrant. You can look that up on your own. This is about some guys who I think could look to potentially be stock raisers, which is really the most important thing when it comes to the combine. Is every single year there always feels like at least a guy or two that sticks out to GMs, executives, scouts as, wow, who is that guy? We didn't really have him that high on our board or on our radar as much. And all of a sudden you start hearing buzz about him maybe being a first round pick or even slipping up into the lottery, like what happened last year with Jalen Williams out of Santa Clara. There's always these potential stock raisers, and it's kind of fun to talk about them beforehand, which I did not do last year. I wish I did, which is why I'm making this video this year. So hopefully you guys do enjoy. If you do, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and let's jump into it now with the NBA Draft Combine. The dates of it, May 16th through May 22nd. Again, it's a week-long event. I had originally hoped to be there in person. I had some kind of changing plans. I'm actually in Georgia right now at the time you're watching this video, likely. So I will not be attending in person this year, but I do have plans to attend next year, which I'm very excited for. And I wanted to get to this event, just had some other stuff come up that kind of changed everything. I'm very busy in my personal life and some of the other things going on. So couldn't make it this year, but I am planning to make it in the future, which I'm very stoked for. So let's jump into our first player I wanted to highlight here, Grant Nelson out of North Dakota State University. Not very often we get to talk about either a bison or a jackrabbit when it comes to the NBA draft. You think about Nate Wolters as one of the last examples of that. Obviously, Baylor Shireman from SDSU a year ago was starting to draw some buzz, but then ended up transferring to Creighton and is not coming out in this year's draft. But those were South Dakota State players. We're looking at a North Dakota State player, which is very rare. We do not see a lot of North Dakota State players in general, but Grant Nelson became somewhat of an internet phenom this year, especially toward the beginning of the season, kind of preseason area, and a little bit thereafter, right at the start of the year, with some absolutely insane highlights and poster dunks. And he's got an extremely impressive athletic capability that a lot of other players in this draft just do not have. And he is a massive, and I mean massive, 2-foot leaper. He can get off of the floor in a hurry. Now, I know he doesn't look like a guy who's going to get off the floor like that. He looks a little bit more like me than anything. But he's an impressive player, though, because of his ability to actually generate power while jumping at the rim. He's going to put people on posters like he did here in this image that I chose for the graphic. And I just think this picture alone sums up why I think he could be a guy to watch for, because you get him in a gym 5-on-5 setting, 1-on-0 workouts, those kinds of areas where they're also doing some of these athletic testing situations and just tests in general. I think Grant Nelson could test very well. Now, does that mean he's going to lock himself up as a draft pick this year? No, but it might mean he gets himself a two-way contract with a team, which is already important. Maybe he gets himself an Exhibit 9 or Exhibit 10 contract, which is a little bit different. That's what Taco Fall had originally signed when he came out of his draft class. And Grant Nelson likely is going to sign on with some NBA team at the very least. But if the combine goes really well for him, I think he could sneak up as a semi-high second-round pick. There's going to be a long pathway for him to get there. I'm not guaranteeing anything like that. I don't think it's extremely likely, but if he posts a high 40s when it comes to vertical, a high 40+ inch vertical, he's going to draw some eyes, and takes 1 or 2 big plays in 5-on-5 scrimmages and just get into the right spot on the floor, and all of a sudden he elevates and dunks on a guy, it's going to be memorable. I think about a guy last year in Darian Sebron, who had a really good draft combine for himself, ended up not getting drafted, but I remember I myself had my perception changed on him quite a bit from the film at NC State to what he actually showed in the combine. I was very impressed with him, and it made me a little bit more hopeful for his NBA future compared to where I was based on his tape. And I think Grant Nelson, a lot of people are going to dismiss him because of the college, and I think the skill set is semi-lacking here. But again, you just have to impress one team, one person, one lead decision maker in the NBA to get a job. And I think Grant Nelson, in front of all of these people, it takes one big moment for him, and I think he might be able to do it if he has a really good draft combine, which again, I'm kind of projecting here, but I think he's a name to watch for at least. Then we go on to Arthur Kaluma, and if you've been watching the videos on the channel for a while now, you're going to know that I actually looked at Arthur Kaluma as a potential first-round pick early, and I mean very early in the process, going back to my way too early mock, which came out a day after the 2022 NBA draft finalized, and after we kind of knew which prospects were going to be playing where last year. I think Kaluma was a guy that I had highlighted as a potential top 20 pick even. Of course, did not have quite the year I was hoping to see him have. He was coming off of a really hot March Madness last year that made me think that the buzz could continue and really generate some interest going into his sophomore season. Did not quite play out that way, but he's got a lot of the tools and traits you're looking for an NBA level wing. He's about 6'7". He's got arms that go on for days, as Jay Billis would say. And because of that, you're already in the discussion as a guy who's maybe worth drafting. And I think Kaluma is probably right now projected safely to be a mid-second round pick. He never really lived up to some of the hopes and aspirations I had for him in terms of the on-ball creation, some of the things he flashed last year in the tourney that just didn't really stick as gospel for him. And I think at some point we're going to need to see him take a step forward. But the 5-on-5 scrimmages could be a really good example of a player here who, if he tests moderately well and then puts together some pretty good days playing against other draft prospects where he's making impactful plays defensively, which is really what I think his best tool is coming into the NBA, plus gets out in transition, gets some easy opportunities that way. And if he finds a shooting rhythm, I think he could be somebody that impresses and plays himself up into kind of the early second round, maybe even back into the first round, because I do think right now picks 26 to 30 are kind of wide open with how the draft feels to me at this point. Obviously, a lot can still change, and some things like to cement themselves this time of the year. But Kaluma, for me, is somebody who I still think could be a high riser. It's also possible that he just decides that, he needs another year in college, which I wouldn't completely rule that out either. But I do think he's a name to watch for, at least because if he has a really good combine, it could really change where we're seeing him projected to go in drafts at this point. Then we go on to Andre Jackson Jr. here from UConn. And this is a player here who I'm going to equate a little bit to Jalen Williams from last year. Not necessarily the same situation, definitely not the same player, but kind of an older player who didn't have a lot of first-round buzz for most of the year. He put together a really good March, a little bit different than what Jalen Williams did, obviously, but Jalen Williams really made a name for himself during the draft combine and significantly helped his draft stock. And I think Andre Jackson Jr. is already a name that's kind of buzzing around the back end of the first round. I have not included him in a ton of first round mocks up to this point, but I do think he's somebody who really does have a legitimate shot and argument to get in there. For me, I've had issues kind of finding the team that's going to take him. But if he has a really strong March, it could be a team that wants to move up, or a really strong combine, it could be a team that wants to move up and get him from the second round, or it could potentially be a team that's even higher than where I've been currently looking for a landing spot, maybe in the early 20s, maybe a team like Brooklyn who has 2 first-round picks, if this combine goes really well for Jackson Jr. Now, there's going to be some steps in there that he's got to take. I think he's going to have to show out really well as a slightly older prospect who I think UConn would be open to having him back as well, but he's going to do what's best for him. And I think ultimately the draft is calling his name. And I do think he will be a draft pick in the 2023 NBA draft. It's just a matter of, is he going before pick 35 or afterward? And I think more than likely I would lean towards before pick number 35 and possibly before 25 if things go very well. Then we go into another prospect who I want to highlight. I haven't talked about him very much on the channel, but it's Kevin McCullar from Kansas. And this is a player who he's played for 4 years in college, 3 of them with Texas Tech, and 1 of them after transferring with the Kansas Jayhawks. And it's kind of funny, I chose this graphic intentionally with him celebrating a 3-point shot. That's really the issue with him, that the swing skill isn't quite there. He's shot pretty poorly from 3 for 3 out of his 4 years in college. And I think that's really the one big question teams have for him, because he's got the prototypical size you're looking for a wing. He's smart. He makes winning plays. I just think that there's questions about his ability to impact the game on the offensive end, especially as a perimeter guy, say sitting in the corner or right around the break offensively. How is this guy going to positively impact your team on the offensive end of the court? And without the shooting touch, that's a big question. So that's why I think this draft combine could be really, really big for him. If he does well in shooting drills, if he hits a few threes in 5-on-5 play and sets himself up for success there, I think the scrimmages are going to be really important for him too, because I think he's going to have a leg up here because he's more experienced. He's already went through the transfer portal once and had to relearn how to play with a whole bunch of new guys, which if you haven't seen anything about the 5-on-5 scrimmages and how this works, guys who are adaptable, who can play through different scenarios and find their way to fit around players and just are active cutters, active movers without the ball, they tend to find a lot of success in this. Especially just with how kind of uncoordinated, disjointed these scrimmages end up being, because it's 10 high-level athletes all running and moving in ways that they've never played with each other before. So it's just kind of awkward spacing and just kind of what you'd expect, right? So I think a guy like Kevin McCullar, if he stands out here and shoots the ball well throughout the duration of a week, it does change the perception of people. You think back to a bunch of other drafts, it always stands out to you, well, he shot the ball really well in his 1-on-0 workout, or he did fantastic on shooting drills and knocked down a bunch of 3-point shots in a row. For me, I love to stick to the tape a little bit more. I think the tape is a lot stronger evidence as to what a player is and isn't, especially in live game action. But sometimes there's just enough there that it can convince one person that, hey, maybe I should invest in this. Maybe there's something there that we didn't see in film. And that's usually what the draft combine does for some guys, which really helps improve their stock and also just generate some buzz for their name around the league as well. Now we go into the player I really am excited to see how he does at the draft combine, because I think it's a significant opportunity to take a similar runway to what his other Santa Clara Bronco teammate, never actually was teammates with him, but Santa Clara Bronco Jalen Williams was able to do last year, and that's Brandin Podziemski this year. Went from sitting on the bench for Illinois to not only starting for Santa Clara and the Broncos, but being WCC Player of the Year in what was a fantastic season for him, averaging over 8 rebounds a game, over 20 points a night, a handful of assists as well, and just is a fantastic basketball player with the ability to put the ball in the hoop, especially behind the 3-point line in a league and in a setting where 3-point shooting is at a premium. He is a highly valued player. Now, there's a lot of discrepancy right now. I've been generically a little bit higher on Brandin Podziemski than others. For me, I look at him as a guy who could be a lottery level selection if he has a really, really great draft combine here, which is what I've been projecting for a decent part of the season. As a sophomore, he's got the age that we've seen players get drafted around this range before. He's got the shooting touch that will draw teams in. The only issue is he's competing with a few other guys when it comes to shooting in this class, like a Jordan Hawkins, like a Dariq Whitehead, like a Grady Dick, that are going to maybe have a little bit of influence on where he gets drafted, because shooting is a little bit less of a premium in this year's class with how many good shooters there are. I haven't even mentioned a guy like Chris Murray yet, for example. There's a lot of good shooting touch in this year's draft. You know, Nick Smith Jr. is another great example, but he can do even a little bit more with the ball in his hands. For Podziemski, you're taking him based off of his ability to impact the game outside of just shooting. He can handle a little bit. You can also expect him to rebound the basketball. Again, nearly 9 rebounds a game at 6'5". Yes, in a semi-weaker conference for the WCC. It's not like a Power 6 conference or anything, but it's still competitive basketball. And we've seen players from Gonzaga get drafted high there. You think about a guy like Corey Kispert. I think Brandin Podziemski has a similar skill set to Kispert, but probably can do a little bit more as well with the ball in his hands, which is why, for me, I would expect Podziemski to be the highest riser from this draft combine, assuming he plays well, because I trust that he's got a pro skill set. I trust that the shooting touch is going to translate, and I think he's going to step into the NBA, and I think he's going to be a high-impact guy pretty quickly because he's got a trade that's going to get him on the floor, and that's really one of the most important things when it comes down to it about GMs and executives and scouts looking at it and say, what kind of role does this guy fill? Shooting is literally the top notch for anyone picking outside of the top 10. pretty much like 75% of the time, can this guy shoot the ball and make the shots? And the answer to that for Podziemski is an astounding yes, which is why there's going to be some significant interest in him after the draft combine. I think he's going to be the name to watch, not just a name to watch, the name to watch in this year's draft combine. Some other honorable mentions that I do want to highlight. I want to start here with DaRon Holmes from Dayton. I'm actually a Flyers fan myself. I decided to not include Tumani Kamara in this video because I don't believe in him as much as an individual who's going to make a lot of noise in the NBA. Now, I think he's going to have a decent draft combine, but I don't think he's going to play himself into a draft pick, whereas DaRon Holmes could potentially play himself into a back end of the first round draft pick, or at least an honorable high-end second round pick, which is, I think, a lot of value. There's not a lot of great size in this draft. Obviously, Victor Wembanyama, Derek Lively, those two come to mind. You also think about some of the other examples, maybe a James Nagy, of course, Noah Clowney, who we've highlighted, but Kyle Filipowski withdrawing from the draft to himself, I think does change kind of the landscape of the big man spot here and what's available. And DaRon Holmes, he's got perimeter shooting touch. He hasn't made a ton of them in his career, but he's somebody who does stick out as a player who's going to develop in that area. He's got a very, very good right-handed hook as well. He's pretty right-handed as a post player, doesn't go to his left very frequently, but that's okay because he's strong, physical, willing to play in contact and through contact and generate contact himself. He's going to knock defenders back off their spots, and he rebounds the ball. Those are all things that teams are looking for. We've seen players who are big get drafted before around that range that I mentioned for Holmes. You think about some examples. Fiondu Kabengele, I think, is a good example of this. Now, is that a player that has had a great career so far? No, but I think Holmes maybe finds himself moving up in the draft similar to what Kabengele did on draft night, where he ended up being a late first-round pick. Another example, I think, would be Daniel Aturu out of the U of M when he was drafted. Another guy I like here, Kobe Brown out of Missouri. This guy's an instant offense bucket getter. The issue with the NBA right now is there's so many good bucket getters that drafting one kind of feels a little bit less return on investment than you'd hope, because are you really going to ever drop in isolation for Kobe Brown? Based on his first name, yes, but based on his full name, probably not. So I think with Brown here, it's about drafting him and you're going to stash him in the G League for a year or two. I think a great example of this is David Duke, who the Brooklyn Nets took in the second round a few years ago. And he just was G League first team with the Long Island Nets, actually. So I think David Duke's going to play himself into a long-term role in the NBA in some capacity, even if it's not high minutes ever. But I think Kobe Brown's going to be somebody who proves his worth this year in this draft combine, just like David Duke did in his own combine. And we'll see a lot of success come from that. And there's going to be a lot of important minutes for Kobe Brown and a lot of important time this next week in developing his game and just showcasing his game to people. Isaiah Wong here from Miami. I think he's a higher radar player than some of these other names. Of course, you know, Miami had a deeper run in March Madness. That definitely helps in terms of notoriety. He's just known as a good player. And I think Isaiah Wong is going to be somebody who he's just going to generate some buzz, and I think he's going to have a solid combine for himself. Typically, these older players do perform a little bit better at the combine as well, I would say. Which brings me to my next player, Adam Flagler, as well, from Baylor. Baylor's had a high amount of players who come into the draft every year. You think about this year, Keontae George is definitely going to be a first-round pick. You think about Davion Mitchell, former lottery pick in his own right. Adam Flagler's been teammates with those guys. He's had a lot of scouts and executives' eyes on him for a while here. The draft combine is not going to be a real big stage for him, honestly, because he's already been watched so many times by people in positions of power that really the overall body of work is going to be a bigger deal for Flagler, which is why I didn't actually include him here as his own candidate. But I do think as an honorable mention, he makes some sense because there's going to be a level of familiarity with him. Scouts are going to know what to look for. They're going to point out things that they like about him because they've seen him play, and he's been a good impact collegiate player for a while now. Adam Flagler's a guy that I think if he puts together a good combine, it's just going to be more of an assurance than anything. But at this time of the year, that's really what you need, is you need to assure people that there's good pros to drafting you. And I think Adam Flagler, maybe like what we saw with Nembhard a year ago, an older guard who maybe plays himself into a second-round pick and maybe even a high second-round pick at that. Thank you all so much for watching. These were some of my names to watch for the NBA Draft Combine. Really excited to have recorded this video. A lot of fun talking about some of these guys, and just seeing what's going to be next for them in their careers. This time of the year is always bittersweet because I love talking about these draft classes. I get so invested into them. So I almost get like a little emotional saying, oh my gosh, we're almost at the end. It's like the parents walking their kids to college type of thing. I always do kind of dread the end of it because it just means, kind of the beginning of a new process and the end of this one. But I do have a lot of fun covering it nonetheless. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next utility sports video.